A few months ago, I published my 100th scripted video, and to make it special, I decided to talk about every one of my favorite fandoms by discussing my favorite songs from each. And I posed the question to you guys, wondering if you would be interested in more videos like that, except instead of just my favorites, it's the happiest songs from each fandom or the most adventurous, etc, etc. To both my surprise and my delight, because I love this topic so much, y'all loved the idea. But why then has it taken me so long to release another video with this premise? Well, a problem I quickly ran into was overlap. You see, I'd put 3 songs from a specific fandom under the idea of the saddest themes, even though they were all kind of competing with each other and I had to figure out which one was the most sad. But then 2 of those also fit under the strongest themes, while another one fit under the most emotional, and thus you see where this is going. And so I realized I needed to come up with my answer for every fandom, for every genre, before creating any of the videos to minimize the chance of repeats. Then again, I have a feeling y'all wouldn't mind if a couple were repeated throughout a couple videos, but still, I don't like the idea of it. Seriously though, it's a massive list. I'm looking at happiest, saddest, most thematic to that particular fandom, funniest, most adventurous, darkest, best to sing with, strongest, most underrated, and finally, today's theme, most emotional. So very fitting for me. This is gonna be fun. Hey y'all, I'm the Geek Apprentice and I am so excited to discuss my favorite, most emotional themes from my favorite fandoms. Now, I need to clarify what I mean by most emotional, because that can mean a myriad of things. Emotional as in sad, nostalgic, dark, personal? What is it? Well, it depends. Frankly, it could be any of these things, probably a mix, and definitely different for each fandom, though I think most are playing on nostalgia. To be sure, I will explain and do each one justice. Though, as previously mentioned, just because it's on this list doesn't mean it didn't have some competitors. It's probable that for most of these fandoms, I had 1 or 2 themes that were equally as emotional. It's just that those themes were also top dog in a different category, such as strongest or darkest. Does that make sense? And of course, what are those fandoms? We have the Legend of Zelda, Disney in general, Disney princesses, Disney Pixar, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, How to Train Your Dragon, Harry Potter, Hunger Games, Pokemon, and Lord of the Rings, although not in a specific order. Y'all know there are other fandoms I very much enjoy, but these are my favorites and the ones that also have the most depth and variety in their music, because I love Animal Crossing, but most of it's pretty happy and upbeat. You're not going to find necessarily a super dark theme, except for KK Dirge. Ugh. Anyway, plug in your earbuds, because sometimes I do have to make the music for these kinds of videos very quiet because of copyright reasons. And with that, let's discuss the most emotional themes from each of my fandoms. Alright, what kind of super emotional theme could Pokemon possibly have? Well, if you've watched the movies, of which I've admittedly only seen 2, then you know that's easier to find than one might think. I've always had a strong soft spot for the first Pokemon movie. It was one of the first films to ever make me cry, and thus you might know where this is going. The most emotional music from the Pokemon franchise to me is the theme Tears of Life from the first ever Pokemon film, Mewtwo Strikes Back. I rewatched this film recently for a movie night with patrons and for a different movie night with some friends from college, and dang, while it certainly is quite silly and dripping with 90s and early 2000s nostalgia, the end with Ash basically dying never ceases to break me. I mean, come on! The composer of the film, whose name I will butcher, Shinya Miyazaki, created an incredibly moving piece of music to accompany this heart-wrenching scene. Between Pikachu's botched revival attempts, the Pokemon's tears, the awakening of Ash, and the absolutely beautiful and precious reunion between Ash and Pikachu, Shinya really did this moment justice. And heck, this was a kid's anime film. No one expects that. But Shinji delivered, and my nostalgic, emotional heart will forever gush upon listening to it. As one would rightfully imagine, Pixar being known for having entire theaters in tears within the first 5 minutes of their films, this fandom had tons of contenders, many of which you will hear me speak about in later videos. However, my pick for Pixar in this category was from one of the few films that didn't have us crying early on, but certainly had even the most stone cold among us weeping at the end. The film is Coco, and the song is Remember Me. Specifically when Miguel sings it to his mama Coco after making it back home. Music was a huge part of the core theme of family in this film. The plot twist behind the song Remember Me was so clever and added far more weight to the story. Robert and Kristen Lopez, I applaud you, but also how dare you make so many of us weep so stinking hard. Using that song as the tie between the whole family, the bond which brings Coco back to reality, teaching Miguel the importance of family, and reunited them all under the beauty of music. It was so excellently done. And as someone who had a family member with Alzheimer's and watched her disappear, seeing them use that sweet song to bring Coco back, especially for the sake of her daughter, was easily one of the most touching and emotional moments in Pixar history. As I said before, even the most cold-hearted people I know shed a tear during this scene, and it's easy to hear why. It's incredibly beautiful, and while it was fighting for spots with saddest and strongest themes, I chose emotional as the genre to place it in. The epic film trilogy that is The Lord of the Rings has quite the array of strong emotional themes. For this fandom, I was torn between a sad emotional song and an overjoyed emotional score. In the end, I went with the latter. Even though it's technically 12 minutes long, this piece is called The Fellowship Reunited from Return of the King. More specifically, that 3-minute chunk where Frodo wakes up. Certainly the entirety of this score is chock full of emotion. Would not expect anything less of Howard Shore, but I have good reason for picking on Frodo's awakening. The joy is incredibly tangible in this scene. I mean, think about it. Frodo waking up to realize that not only is he alive, but so is Gandalf. He spent the second film and most of the third thinking him dead. Then there's the repeated delight of seeing his comrades, his friends, his fellow members of the Fellowship, save for Boromir of course, all alive and well. Likewise, they are thrilled to see Frodo. He saved them all and was incredibly brave. Finally, of course, we have the touching wordless exchange between Samwise Gamgee and Frodo Baggins. Sam may be one of my least favorite characters, don't at me, I just found him incredibly annoying and a lot of the time really prideful. But he's a very well done character and stuck by Frodo and helped him in the worst of times. I totally understand why people love him so much. The experience shared between these two is beyond words, hence why that exchange is facial expressions only. It's beautiful. This whole sequence is beautiful and filled with every emotion from relief to joy to grief to sorrow to happiness, and thus this theme had to be the pick for this list. My pick for most emotional from Disney in general is one that is quite odd and certainly very personal. Frankly, it's nostalgia and nothing else. It's the opening theme, Bella Notte, from Lady and the Tramp. I often forget just how old this film really is, but that's part of its charm and what I adore about it. So simple and sweet. I've always fallen head over heels for this specific theme, and yes, I am being specific. I like the rendition of Bella Notte during the two pups' first date, but it's this opening sequence I love far more. It's taken me 2 decades to both realize and accept that I'm a hopeless romantic at times. I really am. And something about this film plays on that for me. The mix of the story, the atmosphere, the over-romanticized culture of that time period, the sound of the music. I think also it reminds me of my Oma and Opa, who are old-fashioned like this, and have always served as the most beautiful example for me of what love and marriage is supposed to be. This theme brings up all of those most intimate little nostalgic feelings born from a time so long ago, and I registered my adoration for it even as young as 3 years old. Sonny Burke, the writer of this song, did a brilliant job bringing about such romantic but simple elegance. It will always be a favorite and filled with the sweetest of emotions for me. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is no stranger to epic moments. But what happens when you combine epic with pure joy and my stupid emotional self? You get the scene and score Portals from Avengers Endgame. Oh my goodness gracious. Alan Silvestri, y'all. There were plenty of sad themes I could have chosen from for this, even just from Endgame alone, but nothing brought about as much emotion as this scene and the score that accompanied it. I think many can relate to the pure insanity felt in the theaters once we heard Falcon's voice from Captain's perspective. Maybe not as much insanity as when Cap took Mjolnir, but still. I went and saw this film with a few friends, one of whom you've seen on this channel, heard her sing, and is the one who created all those cute images for the channel, Amelia. She and I were absolutely going bonkers between shouts of joy and many tears. Truth be told, were I on my own, I would not have been so loud. However, since I was seeing it with dear friends whom I felt comfortable around, the rest of the auditorium had to suffer. Sorry. I mean, this is one of the most epic and grand scenes of the entire MCU. Yeah, sure, we all knew they were coming back, but seeing it and hearing that fantastic score behind it, all the emotions. Hence, its well-deserved placement on this list. At first glance, the choice might seem obvious, right? Hedwig's theme, one of the most recognizable scores in film history. Props to John Williams, he's got quite the resume. And while it certainly brings me nostalgic and magical bliss to hear that theme and all its variations, no theme is filled with more emotion from the Harry Potter series than the one we hear at the end of Deathly Hallows Part 2, titled A New Beginning. As we zoom out on the dynamic trio, Harry, Ron, and Hermione, beaten, worn, relieved, and sorrowful, standing in front of the disheveled castle of Hogwarts which we all called home for so many years, knowing that finally their pain is over, but also that our journey with them is over. We hear this subtle and sweet melody play in the background. John Williams captures the nostalgia, the heartbreak, the relief, and of course, the magic of this entire series ending. One might think that maybe this would better fit the sad category, but longtime fans of that series know, there's plenty of sadder themes to go off of. This precious piece of music says so much with so little. It almost feels like a love note from the Wizarding World, thanking us for being with them on their adventure, like James Potter till the very end, and that it's time to let go and say goodbye. Until Fantastic Beasts, but anyway. It's the saddest but also most conflicting and magical piece I've ever heard. I knew right away it was the best choice from the franchise for most emotional. Oddly enough, as deep-seated in nostalgia the series of The Legend of Zelda is for me, it took some time to pick a song for this category. And even once I had, it didn't come from one of the older titles. While I highly debated choosing the theme backing one of the last 2 trailers for Breath of the Wild, I decided it needed to be a song from in the game itself. The piece I chose, the one that unleashes a flood of emotions for me every time, comes from Breath of the Wild, from the memory scene where Zelda discovers her powers and saves Link. I know, this might seem like an odd choice, but it's the pairing of the song itself with the gravity of this scene. Beginning with the latter, while this game did not have the strongest storyline, I did greatly feel for Zelda and wanted to follow her journey. And in this moment, not only did I feel proud of her, but also I felt all of that lore finally coming into play. Until this moment, we don't really see any hint of the Triforce or any of those things we usually associate with the Zelda formula. This scene has 2 very important moments. The Triforce glowing on Zelda's hand, and the Master Sword glowing and speaking to her. Many of us believe that could be Fi from Skyward Sword. And the music, holy crap is it perfect. My absolute favorite moment being when Zelda's full power is released, and she's just looking at her hand. That gorgeous choir singing Zelda's lullaby is heavenly, and seemingly so in contrast with the weight of the moment, because this is pivotal for Zelda. In that moment, we are hearing the sudden stunned silence of her head and her heart as she comes to terms with what she finally just did. The world around her for a moment goes blank as she focuses on her abilities being realized after all of that prayer and hard work, that she had finally figured out what will drive her. There were so many emotions for me here, and I remember having every hair on my body stand, chills down my spine, and tears fill my eyes when I first watched this scene and heard the beautiful score accompanying it. I know it wasn't Koji Kondo, but wonderful job to Hajime Wakai. Sorry about pronunciation. I'm beyond thrilled that this piece could make it onto one of these lists. With this series being as dark and tragic as it is, there was no shortage of themes eligible for this kind of list. However, quite similar to what happened with my pick for Harry Potter, the theme chosen for this franchise has to do with an ending. The ending, in fact. It's the theme from Mockingjay Part 2, There Are Worse Games to Play. You have followed this young girl on a journey of hate, anger, terror, PTSD, severe trauma, rebellion, death, and a war she never intended to be the face for. Yes, I do mean young girl. She's barely 18 at the end of the series, not including the epilogue. Getting to this point and seeing what she and many others had always wanted finally coming true. Getting freedom. It should be happy, and many are happy, probably. Future generations will see the fruits of it. But the fruits of what? The very thing that causes severe anxiety, nightmares, flashbacks, and more for young Katniss Everdeen, Peeta Mellark, and no doubt Gale Hawthorne in his own way, and many others. They were willing to pay the price for freedom, knowing it was to save future generations, knowing it was right, knowing they would take the brunt of the hurt and pain. But now, it's finally over, even if not entirely over for their mental faculties. This piece of music that James Newton Howard wrote was brilliant in capturing everything the series had led up to, taking themes we've already heard and both modifying them and adding to them to fill this ending. I firmly believe if you heard this piece without the films, but even just while reading the books, you'd see how it matches the atmosphere, summing up the series beautifully. Like with A New Beginning from Harry Potter, the piece There Are Worse Games to Play is like a somber goodbye to the audience, saying, you have followed Katniss this whole time. You've watched her suffer, screw up, fight, panic, love, cry, hurt and be hurt, and ultimately fight past all of her justified fears. She's okay now. They're all okay, as much as they can be. They won, even if it feels like they only just survived. It's time to close the book, ponder what you can learn from all of this, and move on. I absolutely adore the way composers can do this. The fact that I didn't make How to Train Your Dragon the last one, though these weren't in any particular order, tells you something about the next fandom's choice of song. But let's focus on my most beloved franchise for now. I know we are just coming off of Hunger Games, but just like with Hunger Games and my pick for Harry Potter, we've got another ending theme. It's the piece, Once There Were Dragons, from How to Train Your Dragon: The Hidden World. What can I say? These are the ones with the most emotion. When you've been following a story for so long, whether it's 8 films and 7 books, 4 films and 3 books, or in this case, 3 films, several shorts, and 2 wonderful TV shows, yeah, that final theme that sends you off is something else. John Powell, while I've only heard his work for the Dragon franchise, might very well be my favorite composer just because of my undying love for this series. In one grand and epic ending, he captures the joy, the adventure, the lessons, the journey, the heartache, the sorrow of letting go, and the hope of a better life for both humans and dragons, though it has to be apart. Which is why DreamWorks should never make more for this series. Homecoming was not good, but I digress. I have plenty of videos you can see covering that topic. I've talked about my love for this franchise and its music so much that I fear I'm becoming repetitive. Frankly, while it's arduous to attempt to do justice to any of the music from all of these fandoms, this one especially is difficult to quantify. Hearing it is like opening up the Pandora's box of emotions for me. If you've watched the series and have fallen for it the way I have, then you probably don't need to hear much of an explanation from me. You already know and understand how powerful the music of this series is. How perfect this beautiful theme from John Powell is, as we are forced to say goodbye to the strongest, most epic, beautiful, and wonderful franchise of all time. Well, for me anyway. I still massively regret not getting into the series sooner, but I'm glad I did at all. Out of every fandom I love, this is the one I am most excited to show my future kids one day. Of all the themes on this list, this one is probably the most emotional for me. It shatters me every single time, and that is really saying something. If that last choice was the, quote, most emotional for me, what could be left? And how could it be from a Disney princess film? Well, this one was originally on the list for darkest pieces of music. I moved it here though, as nothing could even equal it in this category. It's a recent piece from a character I've covered on the channel previously. It's Frozen 2's The Next Right Thing. Unlike the other themes on this list, which were wrought with nostalgia, romance, overwhelming joy, or just the beauty of the story, this one is purely sadness. One that I hate how much I relate to. I covered this scene and the character of Anna in general in a previous video that I highly recommend, as my perception of her was shaken by this film. I was so impressed with Disney for taking this path with her. Nonetheless, I'm sure you can understand why this was initially going to be the pick for the darkest songs. I won't lie to you, there are probably other Disney princess themes that might pack more emotion. Indeed, Alan Menken's The Tear Heals from Tangled was so darn close. And do give that a listen if you've seen the film. But, admittedly, this one is personal, and that's why it was chosen. I cannot emphasize enough how much I wanted to simultaneously hug and punch Christoph Beck for writing this song. Any other emotional point in the film, I was just that, emotional. During this scene though, it's as if I wasn't even in the theater watching Anna, but hearing someone read my mind and put it in song form. Music, as longtime viewers know, is something deeply profound and indescribable for me. So to have a song so clearly speak to me on this level was epic. And of course, emotional. Thankfully, I saw this film alone and thus kept the bulk of my emotions to myself so as not to disturb those around me. But oh man, were there tears. I couldn't stop them. It was a constant but silent flow. Anyway, for me personally, this dark but also profoundly powerful song, sung by sweet, normally positive and upbeat Anna from Frozen 2, is easily the piece that gets me the most emotional from all of the Disney princess songs. I hate it, but I also love it. It's indescribable. As I write this, and I guess, well, now record this, I am not looking forward to the editing process of this video for many reasons, but mostly because of adding the music to the background, because that means I have to listen to them all of the most emotional themes. It'll be the same when I do the darkest and saddest themes, I'm sure. But I can never hammer it out enough just how powerful and important music is, and that's why I chose to do emotional themes this time around. As I always say, music has the powerful ability to make or break any form of storytelling media. When a piece of music can capture so many emotions in just a few minutes, unless you're Lord of the Rings, which was 12 minutes, but they're the acceptable exception, then you know you've got something beyond words. Y'all, thank you so much for watching this video. I would love to hear from you all in the comment section telling me your most emotional picks from these fandoms. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining the Geekdom by subscribing and checking out some of my other content. Not only do I make videos on a myriad of geeky topics, but I also do live streams sometimes where you can watch me play video games very badly, but it's a fun time. Massive shout out and thank you to all of my patrons. You guys are amazing and wonderful and awesome, and I can never thank y'all enough for your support. But anyway, that is all for today. Thank you for watching.